Today we uncover the shocking truth about modern UK biscuits. Who remembers when a biscuit was made out of just flour, sugar, some dairy, and a pinch of salt? Sure, it was a tea-time treat, not the healthiest of foods, but at least it was made from real ingredients, real butter, real sugar. You knew exactly what you were getting, so you could enjoy it for precisely what it was meant to be. But now, it's a maze trying to find a single biscuit on supermarket shelves that isn't drenched in palm oil. The mega corporations have made one substitution here, a corner cut there, until everything changed. Everything from the sweetness, the chocolate layer, the cream filling, and the biscuit itself isn't quite what you think it is anymore. Instead, it's a modern manufactured, taste-engineered approximation of a biscuit designed to trick your brain into believing it's still the same thing it was all those years ago. But many of us have started to notice there's a biscuit bar that's been a British lunchbox staple for over 90 years that can no longer legally call its own coating chocolate because the company replaced the real cocoa with cheap vegetable fat and had to admit it in writing on the packet. There's a so-called cream-filled biscuit, sold by the billion, where the filling has never contained a single drop of actual cream. There's a custard biscuit with not only real custard, but not even a drop of real cream anywhere near it. The question is, what is it now? There's a beloved oat biscuit where the wholesome oats are drowned out by palm oil and glucose syrup before the chocolate even enters the picture. There's a chocolate name millions of British families grew up trusting that hasn't been British-owned for well over a decade, even though the branding still looks exactly the same as it always did. And there's a premium European biscuit that quietly removed an entire biscuit from every single pack it sells in this country, and didn't feel the need to drop the price by even a penny. So we've gone through the major brands currently sold in UK supermarkets, and we're about to expose the 9 biscuit products you need to avoid. Then I'll tell you the handful, which ones are actually still worth buying. Before we get into it, I need a favor from you. If any of what you're about to hear makes you angry, even a little bit, hit that hype button right now, not at the end of the video, right now. Here's why it genuinely matters. These companies spend serious money convincing you that nothing has changed, that the biscuit in your hand today is the same one your grandmother used to buy. Every single person who watches a video like this is one more person who turns the packet over and reads the ingredients instead of just trusting the picture on the front. And every one of those people is one less customer these companies can quietly take for granted. That's not a small thing. That is how these recipes actually get changed back. So smash that hype button, drop a comment, tell me which one of these shocks you the most. And let's hold these companies to account together. And let's get into it. Number 9. McVitie's Milk Chocolate Digestives. We're starting with the single most recognized biscuit in Britain. And honestly, there was no other choice for the top spot. The digestive biscuit was invented back in 1839 by 2 doctors who believed the sodium bicarbonate in the recipe genuinely helped settle your stomach after a heavy meal. That's where the name comes from. It wasn't a marketing gimmick, it was an actual medical theory, taken seriously enough that doctors put their names to it. McVitie's took that recipe and refined it into the version most of us know, with their secret formula dating back to 1890, to when a young baker called Alexander Grant developed it in Edinburgh. For well over a century, that heritage has been the entire foundation of the brand, and it's still the best-selling biscuit in the country by most retail estimates, sitting in more British cupboards than almost anything else on a supermarket shelf. The problem is, the antacid claim was debunked decades ago. There's no credible evidence that a digestive biscuit does anything for your digestion beyond what any other biscuit does, and that's exactly why you'll never see McVitie's advertise it that way anymore. Even though the name itself still implies it every single time you say it out loud, turn the packet over and you'll find a chocolate coating built from a blend of vegetable fats alongside the cocoa, bound together with emulsifiers like soya lecithin and E476, plus a generous dose of glucose-fructose syrup running through the base biscuit. None of that is hidden. It's all declared exactly as the law requires. But there's a difference between a company being legally honest and a company actually wanting you to notice. Compare that to the original Victorian recipe, which used a coarser, more wholemeal-style flour and relied on butter rather than a blended vegetable fat to bind everything together. And you start to see just how far the modern mass-produced version has drifted from where it began. A name built on Victorian medicine, a recipe that's drifted a long way from wheat, fat, sugar, bacon, a coating held together with industrial stabilizers instead of pure cocoa butter. That's the biscuit sitting in your cupboard right now that you've probably never thought twice about. It's estimated that British shoppers get through hundreds of millions of packets of chocolate digestives every single year, which makes the gap between that Victorian medical reputation and the modern industrial reality even harder to ignore once you actually know it's there. Number 8. Oreo. Here's something that sounds made up, but isn't. Oreo is sometimes called accidentally vegan, and the reason is almost funny if you think about it for too long. A cream-filled biscuit with a filling that contains no actual cream and never has in the modern recipe. What's inside instead is sugar, palm oil, vegetable oils, and a handful of emulsifiers whipped together to mimic the texture of real cream. It wasn't always quite this formula either. Back in the 1990s, the filling actually used lard, which at least was a real ingredient, before the company switched to partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, the kind we now know are loaded with trans fats. Today's version has moved on to palm oil, blended with glucose-fructose syrup, which sounds like an improvement until you remember what palm oil sourcing actually looks like in parts of the world. That dark wafer everyone associates with Oreo isn't naturally that color either. The cocoa powder goes through a heavy alkalizing process specifically to strip out the natural bitterness and acidity, which is also what gives it that distinctive jet black shade rather than the walnut brown you'd get from untreated cocoa. The brand itself only became a genuine fixture on British shelves in the last 15 years or so, a relatively recent American import that's now sold here by the billion, riding entirely on that twist, lick, and dunk ritual drilled into us through advertising rather than on anything genuinely special about what's inside. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. In the spring of 2025, indigenous campaigners in West Papua publicly called for a boycott of several products made by Mondelez, the company behind Oreo, alongside other well-known names in its portfolio, over claims that the palm oil used in their products was being grown on land cleared from territory their communities say belonged to them. That's not a rumor from a comments section, that was reported by The Guardian. So next time you see that advert with a cold glass of milk, remember what's actually inside that biscuit and where the oil holding it together is reportedly coming from. It's also worth noticing how often new flavor variants of this exact biscuit show up on shelves these days. More filling, different colors, seasonal limited editions, every single one of them built on precisely the same base recipe sitting underneath all that marketing. Number 7. McVitie's Chocolate Hobnobs. This one's dangerous precisely because it feels like the healthier option. Oats have a genuinely good reputation, and rightly so. They're full of fiber, they release energy slowly, and they've earned their place as one of the better things you can eat for breakfast. Hobnobs lean on that reputation hard. The plain version launched back in 1985, with the chocolate-covered version following 2 years later in 1987. And both have ridden that oaty, rustic farmhouse image ever since. Right down to the deliberately rough, hand-cut-looking edges on every biscuit. Here's the problem. Real oats are genuinely in there, but by the time you've added the palm oil, the glucose-fructose syrup, and then wrapped the whole thing in a chocolate coating built from a blend of vegetable fats and emulsifiers like soya lecithin and E476, the actual nutritional benefit of those oats gets buried under everything surrounding them. This is what's sometimes called the oat halo effect, where the mere presence of a genuinely healthy ingredient convinces your brain the whole product must be healthy. Even when it's drowning in exactly the same palm oil and syrup as everything else on this list, it's the same trick used across the snack aisle. Slap a recognizably wholesome word on the front and let your brain do the rest of the marketing for free. Oats deserve their reputation. Hobnobs are quietly spending that reputation on your behalf, without giving you much of the actual benefit back. Stand a hobnob next to a plain wholemeal cracker, and it looks like the obviously virtuous choice, right up until you actually compare what's printed on the back of both packets, at which point the gap between the two becomes a lot harder to ignore. Number 6. Supermarket custard creams. This one's not about a single named brand, it's about a biscuit that sat on the bottom shelf of every major supermarket in Britain for generations, usually for less than £1 a packet. That embossed fern pattern stamped into the top of every custard cream actually dates back to the Victorian era, and it's barely changed since, which is honestly one of the more charming pieces of biscuit history on this entire list. The name suggests something rich and eggy, the kind of custard your nan might have made from scratch with real custard powder and warm milk. The reality is there isn't a single drop of real custard, real cream, or real egg anywhere in the recipe. What you're actually eating is whipped palm oil and vegetable fat, blended with sugar and a synthetic yellow coloring and flavoring designed to taste vaguely of vanilla custard. Whether you're picking these up at Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Lidl or Morrison's, the formula barely changes from one own brand to the next because they're all built around the same cheap base ingredients and the same basic process of whipping fat and sugar until it looks like a filling. You'll find these biscuits everywhere from hospital trolleys to care home tea rounds to the bottom of a biscuit barrel at almost any office in the country. Precisely because they're cheap and they last forever on a shelf without ever needing to be refrigerated or thrown away. And that's really the story here. These biscuits have stayed remarkably cheap for decades, and the reason they've stayed cheap is that the ingredients have been engineered down to the bare minimum cost the entire time. It's inflation hiding in plain sight. The price barely moves because the recipe was never given much room to get any cheaper in the first place. Stand a packet of custard creams next to a packet of bourbon creams on that same bottom shelf and you'll find an almost identical formula underneath, just swapping the vanilla flavoring for a cocoa one, which tells you everything about how interchangeable these cheap fillings really are once you strip away the name on the front. Number 5. McVitie's Penguin. Now this is the one that genuinely shocked me when I found out about it. The Penguin bar first launched back in 1932, and for the better part of a century it's been sold as a fully chocolate-coated biscuit bar, the kind you'd find in lunchboxes up and down the country, alongside a carton of squash. Global cocoa prices spiked to some of the highest levels ever recorded going into 2025, driven by poor harvests across the main West African growing regions, and rather than absorb that cost, the company behind it, Lotus, quietly reformulated the coating and confirmed to journalists on the record that it no longer meets the legal definition of milk chocolate. Read that back. The biscuit can no longer legally be called what it's been called for over 90 years. The packet now describes it as a milk chocolate flavor coating built from a blend of vegetable fats, including palm and shea oils, held together with the emulsifier E476, which lets manufacturers stretch a smaller amount of real cocoa butter much further than it would naturally go. For a product whose entire identity was built around being a proper, fully coated chocolate biscuit, that's not a small tweak. That's the company admitting in writing that what's wrapped around your biscuit today isn't what was wrapped around it for generations. And it wasn't the only household name biscuit bar to face that exact same pressure that year either. For a biscuit that's been a packed lunch fixture since before most of us were born, that's a genuinely significant moment, even if most shoppers never noticed the wording change on the packaging at all. Plenty of longtime fans noticed straight away too, posting side-by-side photos online comparing the duller, thinner coating on today's bar against wrappers and biscuits some of them had genuinely kept from decades earlier. Number 4. Jacob's McVitie's Club Bar. This one shares the exact same root cause as the Penguin, the same cocoa price pressure, the same parent company in Lotus. But it deserves its own spot because of what it does to one of the most famous biscuit jingles in British advertising history. For decades, the line was, "If you like a lot of chocolate on your biscuit, join our club," and that jingle worked its way into the heads of an entire generation who can probably still hum it today without even trying. The trouble is, that slogan was a promise, and it's a promise the modern club bar genuinely can't keep anymore. With the coating now built from the same blend of vegetable fats and emulsifiers as the Penguin rather than a proper chocolate covering, the lot of chocolate the jingle bragged about has been quietly replaced with a thinner, waxier layer that simply isn't what it used to claim to be. Jacobs themselves have built a long-standing reputation around honest, simple baking, going back to their cream cracker recipe that's barely changed in over a century, which only makes the contrast sharper here. It's one thing to change a recipe, it's another thing entirely to keep singing the same tune about a biscuit that no longer lives up to the words. Generations of British schoolchildren grew up trading their orange or mint-flavoured club bar at lunchtime without a second thought, which only makes it sting more now that the headline claim behind every single one of those bars no longer holds up. Number 3. Cadbury Chocolate Fingers. Cadbury's heritage in this country runs deep. Founded in 1824 in Birmingham by a Quaker family who built their reputation on quality cocoa long before chocolate fingers themselves arrived on shelves after the war. That heritage is exactly why so many people are still surprised to learn that Cadbury hasn't been a British-owned company for well over a decade now. Ever since an American conglomerate bought the business in a deal that came with promises about protecting British jobs and factories, promises that didn't entirely hold up once the takeover was complete. Cadbury now sits under Mondelez, an American company headquartered in Chicago rather than Birmingham. The packet still looks the same. The branding still leans hard on Britishness, but the company writing the checks is on the other side of the Atlantic. As for what's actually in a finger, the chocolate coating is built from a blend of vegetable fats, including palm, shea, and sal oils, alongside the emulsifier E476, which food scientists use to let a smaller amount of real cocoa butter go a much longer way while still keeping that glossy, smooth snap people associate with proper chocolate. It's not some hidden conspiracy, it's a documented cost-saving technique used across the industry. But it's worth knowing that the lunchbox staple millions of British parents grew up with is now made by an American company, using a fraction of the cocoa butter Cadbury used to insist on when it controlled its own sourcing in Bourneville, the model village it built outside Birmingham specifically so its workers could live close to the factory that used to set the standard for the entire industry. Number 2. Lotus Biscoff. Walk into pretty much any coffee shop in Britain and you'll find one of these sitting on the saucer next to your drink, and that placement alone has done more for this biscuit's reputation than almost any advert could. It's positioned as something sophisticated, something above your average tea-time biscuit, the kind of treat that comes with a hint of European cafe culture built right in. And in the last few years it's exploded well beyond the coffee saucer entirely, turning up in spreads, cheesecakes, and even flavored lattes, almost as if the brand has become a flavor in its own right, rather than just a... Here's what that premium positioning conveniently leaves out. Roughly close to a third of the weight of every single biscoff biscuit is sugar. The ingredient list is wheat flour, sugar, a blend of vegetable oils that can include soybean, sunflower, canola, and palm, a brown sugar syrup, and sodium bicarbonate as the raising agent. That's a caramelized sugar biscuit with a hit of cinnamon, dressed up in continental branding, originally from Belgium rather than anywhere particularly exotic. There's nothing wrong with enjoying one alongside your coffee. The premium image it's been given has very little to do with what's actually inside the packet, and almost everything to do with where it's been placed on the saucer and how relentlessly it's been pushed across social media as the trendy biscuit of the moment. The same flavor now turns up in ice creams and even cereal aimed at children, which means a recipe built on caramelized sugar and a blend of vegetable oils is being introduced to a much younger audience than the coffee shop image ever suggested. Number 1. Bahlsen Choco Leibniz. We're closing out the avoid list with one that's a little different from everything before it, because the ingredients here are actually fairly honest. Bahlsen has been making biscuits in Germany since 1889, and the Choco Leibniz genuinely is coated in real chocolate, built from proper cocoa mass and cocoa butter, rather than a vegetable fat substitute. With real butter running through the biscuit base too, by the standards of everything else on this list, that's a relatively clean ingredients panel. So why does it still make the cut? Because of what happened to the pack itself. For years, a standard pack contained 9 biscuits and weighed 125 grams. Then, without much fanfare, that pack quietly became 111 grams, containing only 8 biscuits, a reduction confirmed on the record by a Bahlsen spokesperson who cited rising cocoa costs as the reason. Here's the part that should annoy you. The price on the shelf stayed exactly where it was, £1.85, in Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda and Morrisons alike. You're not paying less for less. You're paying exactly the same for noticeably less, and unless you happen to weigh your biscuits before you eat them, you probably never even notice the difference, which is rather the point of doing it quietly in the first place. For a brand that markets itself as a premium, family-owned alternative to the cheaper British names on supermarket shelves, that's a particularly disappointing way to treat the people paying extra for the privilege. Consumer groups have been flagging exactly this kind of move for years now. Smaller packs, dressed up in redesigned packaging that's easy to mistake for the old one at a glance, and Bahlsen is far from the only manufacturer doing it. But it stings more from a brand whose entire pitch is that you're paying a bit extra for something better. So that's the avoid list. 9 biscuits, 9 completely different ways of cutting corners while hoping you wouldn't look too closely. But it's not all bad news. There are still genuine, honestly made biscuits sitting on British shelves. You just have to know which ones to reach for and what to forgive once you do. None of these are perfect, because very few mass-produced biscuits ever are, but each one of them does at least one thing properly that the avoid list doesn't. And every single one of them is something you could pick up on a normal weekly shop without going out of your way. First, Walker's Shortbread Fingers. If you want proof that a biscuit doesn't need a chemistry set to taste good, turn over a pack of Walker's and read the ingredients. Wheat flour, butter at 32%, sugar, and salt. That's the entire list. No palm oil, no emulsifiers, no flavor coating standing in for real chocolate, because there's no chocolate involved at all, just proper butter doing the job butter is supposed to do. Walker's is still a family-owned Scottish company, and the recipe has barely changed in generations, because when something works this simply, there's very little reason to mess with it. It's not the cheapest biscuit on the shelf, real butter never is, but you can actually see and taste exactly where the extra cost has gone, which is more than can be said for most of the avoid list. It's also one of the easiest swaps on this entire video to actually make, sitting on the shelf at pretty much every major supermarket in the country, rather than tucked away somewhere you'd have to go hunting for it. Second, Nairn's Dark Chocolate Chip Oat Biscuits. Unlike the hobnob further up this list, Nairn's actually backs up its OT image with real numbers. Whole grain oats make up 59% of the recipe, and the dark chocolate chips are made from genuine cocoa mass and cocoa butter rather than a cheap vegetable fat. The brand also claims somewhere between 35 and 40% less sugar than the average sweet biscuit, depending on which range you're comparing against. And at around 45 calories a biscuit, it's genuinely a more sensible everyday treat than most of what we've already covered. It isn't flawless, it does still contain a small amount of palm oil, sourced from what the company describes as a sustainable supply chain, so it's fair to call this one better rather than perfect. But better, backed by an honest ingredients list you can actually verify on the back of the pack, still counts for a lot. Nairn's describes itself as carrying over a century of oat baking expertise, and whatever you make of the marketing language, the ingredients panel here genuinely backs that history up, rather than just borrowing it the way Hobnobs does further up this list. Third, Border Biscuits Dark Chocolate Ginger. This one comes from a family bakery that's been running in Lanark, Scotland since 1984. And the chocolate coating here is the real thing. With a minimum of 35% dry cocoa solids made from genuine cocoa mass and cocoa butter, rather than a flavor coating standing in for the genuine article. Like Nairn's, it isn't entirely free of compromise. The biscuit base does contain some palm and rapeseed oil, again declared as sustainably sourced, so don't go in expecting a completely clean ingredients panel. But when you bite into a properly tempered chocolate coating with real ground ginger running through it, you can taste the difference between a company that bothered with real ingredients and one that didn't. And that difference is exactly what you're paying the slightly higher price for. It's still very much a treat rather than an everyday biscuit, but as far as treats go, it's an honest one. Fourth, Gullen Sugar-Free Digestives. If the original digestive earlier in this video put you off McVitie's for good, this is the closest you'll get to the same biscuit made properly. Instead of palm oil, the recipe uses high oleic sunflower oil, and instead of added sugar, it's sweetened with sugar alcohols like maltitol and isomalt, alongside a fiber called oligofructose. Worth knowing before you stock up, sugar alcohols like maltitol can have a laxative effect if you eat more than a handful in one sitting. So this is very much a swap to make in moderation, rather than a free pass to eat the whole packet just because it says sugar-free on the front. You'll find these in Aldi, B&M, Home Bargains, and on Amazon. usually for a fraction of what you'd pay for some of the so-called premium options earlier in this list. And they're proof that even the most heavily compromised biscuit on this entire video has a genuinely better version sitting just a few aisles away. Galón is a Spanish manufacturer that's built its whole reputation around sugar-free and high-fiber baking. So unlike most of what we've covered tonight, this isn't a mainstream brand quietly cutting corners. It's a company whose entire business is built around doing the opposite. I want to be clear about something before we wrap up. I'm not having a go at anyone who buys these biscuits. Most of us grew up with half the names on this list, and there's nothing wrong with reaching for a packet of digestives or a sleeve of custard creams without thinking twice about it, because for most of British history, that's exactly what biscuits were supposed to be: cheap, cheerful, and uncomplicated. What's changed isn't us. It's the recipes quietly reformulated behind packaging that hasn't changed nearly as much as what's inside it, while the price on the shelf somehow keeps climbing anyway. When a company swaps real cocoa for vegetable fat or shrinks a pack while holding the price steady, that's a decision made in a boardroom, not a personal failing on your part for not noticing it sooner. The only way that decision ever gets reversed is if enough people start noticing, start reading the back of the packet instead of trusting the front, and start choosing differently because of it. None of these companies are going to change a winning formula out of the goodness of their own hearts. They only ever move when enough of their own customers stop quietly accepting it. So if this video helped you see your own biscuit tin a little differently, do me one last favor. Hit that hype button before you go, because the more people who see this in the next few hours, the more pressure these companies actually feel to clean up what they're selling. Drop a comment and tell me which food you want investigated next, because I read every single one and your suggestions genuinely shape what we cover here. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because there's plenty more of this coming and there are still entire aisles of this supermarket we haven't gone through yet. Until next time, read the ingredients, trust your own taste over the marketing, and protect your plate.